At exactly 2:43 p.m., Senator Bernie Sanders pulled up a classified DOJ memo and stated words that would haunt Attorney General nominee Pam Bondi forever. "You shredded the Constitution." The memo, signed by Bondi herself, had authorized Trump to extract a foreign leader without congressional approval, setting a precedent that could end American democracy as we know it. What happened in the next 14 minutes would prove that Bondi hadn't just enabled an illegal operation, she had sold constitutional government for a Supreme Court seat. Cameras captured every desperate denial, every moment of Bondi's complete professional disintegration, as committee screens displayed evidence so damning it would trigger the biggest constitutional crisis in modern history. The Hart Senate Building's Judiciary Committee hearing room carried the weight of democracy hanging in the balance. Large screens flanked both sides of the chamber. Today, they would display constitutional betrayal that had turned America's founding principles into personal bargaining chips. Attorney General nominee Pam Bondi sat confidently behind the witness table, claiming her legal expertise had always served constitutional principles. What she didn't know was that Senator Sanders had obtained classified DOJ documents showing exactly how she had provided legal cover for the most brazen violation of war powers in American history. Senator Bernie Sanders brought unique credentials to this constitutional confrontation. Decades of defending democratic principles against authoritarian overreach, a reputation for cutting through political BS that made constitutional evasion impossible. Most importantly, a populist who could explain complex legal violations in terms every American understood. Today, Sanders had obtained something that would demolish Bondi's constitutional rhetoric: DOJ internal memos showing exactly how she had crafted legal justification for bypassing Congress and what she had been promised in exchange for shredding Democratic oversight.
"Miss Bondi," Sanders began, his voice carrying controlled fury of someone about to expose the destruction of American democracy. "You've testified about your respect for constitutional principles. Let's examine what you actually did when the Constitution got in the way of what Donald Trump wanted." Bondi maintained her confident posture. "Senator Sanders, my legal work has always been grounded in constitutional authority and democratic oversight. I'd like to show the committee a classified DOJ memo you wrote," Sanders interrupted, fingers moving to his tablet with surgical precision, "because this document shows exactly how you provided legal justification for destroying congressional war powers forever." He pressed a button. The screens exploded with a classified DOJ memorandum that made committee members audibly gasp. "This is a classified Department of Justice memo dated December 18, 2025, titled Presidential Authority for Military Operations Against Foreign Heads of State, authored by Pamela Bondi." The memo header showed classification levels, proving both its sensitivity and devastating constitutional implications. "Let me read from your own constitutional analysis, Ms. Bondi," Sanders said, voice sharpening with moral authority. "Presidential war powers under Article 2 provide inherent authority to conduct military operations against foreign threats without prior congressional authorization when national security interests are at stake." He looked up from the classified memo. "Ms. Bondi, you just argued that the president can wage war against anyone, anywhere, anytime without asking Congress. That's not constitutional interpretation. That's constitutional destruction." Bondi attempted to defend her reasoning. "Senator, legal analysis of executive authority involves complex considerations of national security." "Complex considerations?" Sanders interrupted with controlled fury. "Let me show you what your complex considerations actually accomplished." The screen transformed to show real-world application of Bondi's constitutional memo. Operation Absolute Resolve, military extraction of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, January 2nd, 3rd, 2026. Congressional notification, none provided until after completion. Legal authorization, Pamela Bondi's December 18th memo. A timeline appeared showing complete bypass of democratic oversight that Bondi had enabled. Miss Bondi, your memo wasn't theoretical legal analysis. It was operational authorization for Trump to wage war against Venezuela without telling Congress until after American forces were already on the ground. But the constitutional implications got even more terrifying when Sanders showed the precedent Bondi had established. Let me show you what constitutional scholars are saying about your memo, Sanders continued, pulling up expert analysis. Harvard constitutional law professor Lawrence Tribe. The Bondi memo effectively eliminates congressional war powers and establishes presidential dictatorship over military force. The academic consensus was clear. Bondi had destroyed constitutional government. Miss Bondi, you didn't interpret the Constitution, you rewrote it, and you did it to give Donald Trump the power of a king. At 2:48 p.m., exactly 5 minutes into Sanders' constitutional demolition, Bondi experienced first signs of professional breakdown as cameras captured her realizing the scope of democratic betrayal. Her hands began trembling as she reached for her water glass. Senator, executive authority analysis requires understanding of operational constraints. Let's examine what you understood about operational constraints, Sanders interrupted. The screen displayed internal White House communications proving coordination between constitutional destruction and personal advancement. The communications proved constitutional betrayal had been coordinated with personal advancement. White House Chief of Staff to Donald Trump. December 16. Bondi memo provides clean legal justification for operation. Recommend follow-through on Supreme Court discussion. Trump response, perfect. Pam understands what loyalty means. The exchange proved direct quid pro quo, constitutional destruction in exchange for Supreme Court nomination. Miss Bondi, you provided legal cover for destroying congressional war powers because Donald Trump promised you a Supreme Court seat. You sold the Constitution for personal advancement. But Sanders wasn't finished exposing Bondi's constitutional treason. The White House files show exactly what you were promised for gutting Democratic oversight, he continued, voice taking on edge of someone who had uncovered systematic betrayal. The screen showed additional communications that would end Bondi's confirmation. Donald Trump to Pam Bondi, December 19, 2025. Your constitutional work gives me the flexibility I need. When there's a Supreme Court opening, you'll be my first call. Bondi response, constitutional interpretation should serve presidential effectiveness. The recorded communications were a confession of constitutional corruption that made denial impossible. At 2:51 p.m., Bondi attempted to deny the constitutional evidence, revealing complete desperation. Senator, you're mischaracterizing legal consultations and normal constitutional analysis, she stammered, voice showing clear stress. Normal constitutional analysis? Sanders' response carried genuine incredulity mixed with populist rage. Miss Bondi, let me show you what your normal constitutional analysis means for every American. He pulled up constitutional expert testimony that made implications crystal clear. Constitutional scholars agree your memo establishes precedent that allows any president to wage war against any country without congressional approval. Iran, China, Russia, any future president can now cite the Bondi Precedent to justify military action without democratic oversight. The implications affected every American's future security. Ms. Bondi, you didn't just enable one operation, you created constitutional precedent that turns every future president into a potential dictator with unlimited war powers. At 2:54 p.m., Sanders delivered constitutional evidence that would trigger Bondi's complete collapse. But the most damning evidence of your constitutional betrayal is what happened after the operation succeeded. He pulled up post-operation communications. Trump to Bondi, January 4, 2026. Your constitutional memo worked perfectly. Supreme Court opening coming soon. You've earned it. Bondi response. Ready to provide similar analysis for future operations. The communications proved ongoing constitutional destruction was planned. Ms. Bondi, you weren't just providing legal analysis, you were promising to continue destroying congressional war powers for personal advancement. At 2:55 p.m., Pam Bondi experienced complete professional breakdown as the full scope of her constitutional betrayal was displayed on national television. She stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly, composure completely shattered. This is classified material being weaponized to destroy qualified nominees. Sit down, Ms. Bondi, Sanders commanded with constitutional authority. The Democratic evidence isn't finished. But Bondi remained standing, hands trembling visibly as she pointed at screens. Those communications are being taken out of context. You're criminalizing normal legal consultation. The image of an attorney general nominee having a meltdown while defending constitutional destruction would replay millions of times. Sanders pulled up his final constitutional file. Expert testimony showing permanent damage Bondi had inflicted on American democracy. Constitutional scholars have calculated the long-term implications of your memo, he said, voice carrying weight of democratic history. The screen displayed constitutional analysis connecting Bondi's memo to the death of congressional oversight. The Bondi Precedent eliminates the war powers resolution. It guts congressional war powers. It establishes unlimited executive authority that the founders specifically designed the Constitution to prevent. Sanders' voice carried devastating constitutional finality. You didn't provide legal analysis. You provided the legal framework for ending American democracy. He gestured to screens displaying irrefutable constitutional evidence, Supreme Court deal, constitutional memo, congressional bypass, Democratic oversight destroyed, all documented in classified White House communications. As Bondi stood trembling with rage and constitutional defeat, Sanders delivered his Democratic verdict. This wasn't legal consultation. This was constitutional treason. You sold 250 years of Democratic government for a Supreme Court seat. Within minutes, #ConstitutionalTraitor began trending worldwide as America processed how an attorney general nominee had sold Democratic oversight for career advancement. The constitutional evidence was irrefutable, the Democratic betrayal undeniable, and Bondi's confirmation ended by her own classified memo proving she had shredded the Constitution for a Supreme Court promise.